Somewhere in the highlands of Ethiopia, there's a book that looks like a Bible. People treat it like a Bible, but crack it open and you'll find things yours doesn't have. Angels who fell from heaven, giants who once walked this earth. 88 chapters, not 66. 22 of them gone from the version sitting on your shelf, as if they were never written at all. Most of us were never even taught to ask why. Somebody decided what belongs in Scripture, and somebody decided what gets left behind. I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm here to show you the pages nobody handed you. To understand this book, you have to go back almost 2,000 years, long before Rome ever called itself Christian. Back to the kingdom of Aksum, rich, powerful, sitting right at the crossroads of Africa and Arabia. And in the 4th century, Aksum did something almost no nation on earth had done before. It made Christianity the law of the land, on its own terms. Compare that to Rome. Faith there followed politics, an emperor, a battle, a calculated move toward unity. Aksum skipped all of that. A kingdom simply looked at this new religion and decided it was true. No emperor forcing the issue. No war behind it. That alone puts it in rare company. But geography had its own plans. Rome had roads, open trade routes running in every direction. Ethiopia had mountains, distance, a landscape that boxed it in, and almost by design. So for the next 1,000 years, while bishops and distant councils argued over what belonged in Scripture and what didn't, Ethiopia wasn't in the room, wasn't invited, wasn't even on the map those debates were drawn on. Its priests kept going anyway, writing, copying, preserving everything handed down to them in an ancient language called Ge'ez. No committee reaching in to remove pages. No vote deciding what stays and what goes. Call it an accident of geography if you want. Ethiopia simply missing the meetings where the Western canon got trimmed down. But there's a stronger case to make. This wasn't passive at all. Generation after generation, Ethiopian scribes actively chose to keep copying texts that Europe had already agreed to abandon. That's not an accident. That's a decision repeated for 1,000 years straight. One tradition kept editing itself down. The other kept everything on purpose. Chapter 1 doesn't start on earth. It starts above it. Before Noah. Before the flood. The text says heaven had a problem. A group of angels. The Watchers looked down at humanity and came down to meet them. Not to help. To teach things they were never supposed to share. How to forge weapons for war. How to read the stars for power. How to reshape the human body and reshape desire itself. Knowledge humanity was never meant to hold, handed over anyway. And the Watchers went further. They took human wives. What came from that, the text doesn't soften. Giants. Nephilim. Creatures so massive, so hungry, they began devouring everything around them until the earth itself couldn't feed them anymore. This isn't some strange detour buried inside Enoch. This is Enoch. Enoch himself gets carried through the layers of heaven, shown the throne of judgment, shown the end of everything, in language that resurfaces later, almost word for word, in the book of Revelation. Think about why this book made people nervous enough to cut it. Most scripture tells you humans sinned, and that's the root of it all. Enoch tells a darker version. Outside forces corrupted us first. Heaven's own creatures broke the rules before we ever had the chance. By the 4th century, church leaders were assembling one clean, unified doctrine. A book this chaotic didn't fit the story they were building, so it got pushed to the margins, not erased exactly. just left out of the final draft, except it never fully disappeared. The Book of Jude, sitting in the New Testament you already own, quotes Enoch directly, by name. If it was real enough to quote, real enough to be treated as prophecy, what made it too dangerous to keep? Its fingerprints are still everywhere. Ideas of heaven, judgment, fallen angels, the imagery that shaped centuries of art and belief, trace straight back to this book, even inside traditions that officially rejected it. A canon can drop a text. Erasing what that text planted in the imagination is a different job entirely. You probably think you know Genesis, Adam, Eve, the garden, the fall. According to this book, you only ever got half of it. While Moses was receiving the Ten Commandments, the text says something else was handed to him in the same breath. A second telling of Genesis, longer, stranger, and far more detailed than the one you grew up with. Here, angels aren't a later addition to the story. They're present from the very first moment, watching Eden unfold in real time, close enough to touch it. And buried inside it is something stranger still, a calendar. A precise, sacred way of counting time, different from anything you'd recognize. A rhythm the text insists heaven itself runs on. That calendar wasn't decoration. In the ancient world, getting sacred time wrong could mean getting your entire relationship with God wrong. Every feast, every holy day thrown out of alignment. Jubilees wasn't retelling Genesis for flavor. It was making a claim about how the universe is actually ordered and who has the authority to set that order. Then come the details Genesis leaves out entirely. Who did Cain actually marry? What did Noah say to his sons before they scattered across the earth? This book answers questions yours never even raises. And buried in the middle of it all, one line most people never hear in their entire lives. A war in heaven. Before Eden ever existed. Not after the fall. Before it. Which means the story you were taught, the one starting in a garden with a single act of disobedience, might not be where this story actually begins. Two very different readings sit side by side on this. One camp sees it as an attempt to move the blame for evil off humanity entirely, plant the fracture in heaven before Adam or Eve ever had a choice to make. The other camp reads it as evidence of just how many competing creation stories were circulating at once, each one wrestling with the same unanswerable question from a different angle. Neither side has won that argument. It's still open, which tells you something on its own. This was never settled scripture handed down from on high. It was a live conversation, and Jubilees is one voice shouting into it. This is where the story stops being about what was left out, and starts being about what Ethiopia chose to write for itself. If the name Maccabees means anything to you, you're picturing Judea. A revolt against an empire. A fight to keep faith alive. Set that image aside. The Meqabyan isn't that story wearing a new name. Different kings, different battles, written on different soil for a different people entirely. 3 books. 3 kings who drift from their faith and chase after idols instead. 3 accounts of what happens when a nation forgets who it is. Betrayal. War. Judgment. A story every generation, everywhere, ends up needing to tell in its own voice. Here's what most people miss entirely. This wasn't copied out of Jerusalem, then quietly relabeled and passed off as something new. It was authored on Ethiopian soil by Ethiopian hands for an Ethiopian people from the very first line. That matters more than the story on its own would suggest. For centuries, the working assumption in Western scholarship was simple. Sacred texts moved outward from Jerusalem, from Rome, from Constantinople, and everyone else simply received them downstream. Ethiopia rarely got imagined as a place that produced scripture. only a place that safeguarded someone else's. The Meqabyan blows a hole in that assumption. Ethiopian Christianity wasn't a distant outpost taking orders from somewhere else. It was its own center of gravity, writing, judging, deciding for itself what belonged in its sacred story. So the question changes. It's no longer just, what did Ethiopia manage to hold on to while the rest of the world moved on? It's this. What if Ethiopia was never only a vault, guarding someone else's sacred texts? What if it was also a source, writing its own scripture on its own terms, answering to no one? You can still see that legacy today in the sheer shape of the Ethiopian Orthodox canon, the largest Christian Bible on the planet, built not by cutting things away like nearly every other tradition, but by continuing to add. A church that simply never put the pen down. That's not preservation, that's authorship. 1773. A Scottish traveler named James Bruce arrives in Ethiopia, searching for the source of the Nile. He doesn't just find a river. He finds copies of the Book of Enoch, the same forbidden chapters, sitting exactly where they'd always been. He carries them back to Europe like treasure pulled from a shipwreck. And for a moment, the world actually pays attention. Scholars translate it, debate it, marvel at it even. Then one by one they set it down, filed away, footnoted. Reduced to a passing mention in academic journals, nobody outside a university would ever open. Two things happened at once here, and both are worth sitting with. First, plain condescension. European institutions of the era treated African religious tradition as a curiosity worth cataloging, not an authority worth learning from. The manuscript got studied like an artifact, never respected as living scripture. But there's a second, colder explanation too. By the 1700s, the Western biblical canon had already been locked in place for well over 1,000 years. There was no mechanism left to slot a new ancient text back in, no matter its age or weight. The door didn't get slammed on Enoch out of malice. It had already been bricked over long before Bruce ever arrived. Condescension opened the door partway. Structure made sure it never stayed open. And here's what should stop you cold. This entire time, nothing in Ethiopia was ever hidden. Priests read these words aloud every week. Children memorized these passages before they could even read the alphabet. There was no secret to keep. It was only forbidden to the people who weren't looking. That gap left a real mark. It shaped what generations of readers assumed a complete Bible even looked like. One regional outcome mistaken for a universal standard, while millions grew up never learning another version had ever existed at all. So maybe the real question was never, what did they hide from us? Maybe it's this. Why did it take 2,000 years to look anywhere other than here? So let's go back to where we started. A book, a candle, a page turning in the dark. Only now you know what's written on it. Fallen angels who taught humanity what it was never meant to know. Giants who outgrew the earth that made them. A war fought before the garden existed. Kings written not in Jerusalem, but by Ethiopian hands, for an Ethiopian people. No conspiracy hid any of it. No decree erased it. It was distance, mountains, centuries of people looking everywhere except where the answer actually sat. This was never really a story about forbidden chapters. It was a story about who gets to decide what complete even means. Every version of scripture you've ever held was shaped by someone. A council, a king, a committee centuries ago, deciding what stays and what gets quietly written out. Ethiopia just happened to be far enough away to never get the memo. So the next time someone hands you a Bible and calls it whole, ask them one thing. The answer's been sitting in the Ethiopian highlands the whole time, waiting for someone to turn the page.